Alright, so before we start this lesson, we're going to do a really quick review on how to create our objects and move around. And so let's just create a teapot. Remember our basic command, just create a teapot. You're in the danger zone here. Right mouse click to select out of that command. Middle mouse button to pan. Alt mouse button to move around and rotate like that. You know, move to zoom. Stuff like that. Okay, so now that we have all those down, let's go to our manipulations again. We have W for our move gizmo, R or E rather for our rotate, and R for our scale. Alright, so hit Q to go back to just select. And then now today we're going to get to the modify panel. Now, we're in our create panel right now. You can see this little yellow sun looking thing is how we create objects. Now we're going to go right to the right of it and to our modify panel. Now our modify panel is how we move and manipulate our objects even further with more control. And we got tons of modifiers here. I'm just, we're not going to go over all of them, even in this tutorial series. There's just way too much, and they all do way different things. But we're going to go over some basic ones that do basic things and show how they work. So, to access them, you're just going to click this drop-down menu. And then you can scroll and view the different ones here. I want you to go notice that they're in alphabetical order. So we have A, and it goes all the way down to Z or X, whatever it ends at. Now I'm gonna want you to go to the B's and select the bend modifier. Now once you have the modifier, you will notice it's added to your modifier stack. Now we can switch between the stack. Let's go select the teapot, and then look, we have all our teapot parameters here, which is our radius and how many segments. So add a few more segments, mess with the radius a little bit, and then go back to bend. Now our bend is going to have a totally different parameters. It's going to manipulate it in a different way. Let's just crank up our angle and see what it does. So this modifier bends the actual object. And you could also select which direction it bends in. And then let's go back to teapot and see what happens. We can go and mess with the settings, the radius, and how many segments there are, without messing with the parameters of the bend. And so those are the basics of how the modifier panel works. It starts at the top, and it works its way down, and then it finally calculates the last object that you see before you. Now let's select another one. Let's select a... let's select a Turbosmooth Modifier. So let's go down to the T's. We're going to select Turbosmooth. Now what Turbosmooth does, it's a modifier that basically makes jagged objects look smoother. Now this was a bad example because it's a teapot, it's already kind of smooth, but it adds a lot of geometry to it in order to make the edges smoother. So you see that there? Let's Alt W to make this the perspective view full screen. Now, how do you turn off modifiers but keep them in your stack? Now that's really easy to do. If you look at your stack here, you're going to see these little light bulbs. And then you just select a light bulb, and it's going to turn that modifier off. So that's what it looks like with Turbosmooth and Teapot, but without the bend. Let's turn Turbosmooth off. We're going to see what it looks like without it. But you're not destroying the actual modifier. You're just turning it off. Now let's go back down to the teapot. Now let's say, that's great, we have this teapot, but I just want to see the teapot without any of these modifiers above it. To do that, you're just going to click this little button right here, which is, if you hover your mouse over it, it's going to show you that it says Show End Result On-Off Toggle. Now what that does, it basically turns off whatever modifiers are above it. So if we go to our bend, it's going to turn off our Turbosmooth. But if we go back to teapot, it's going to turn off both. So if you have this button disabled, it's going to turn off whatever modifiers are above it in the stack. And so let's turn that back on and go back to our teapot. Now, as you can imagine, when you add more and more modifiers to an object, it adds more and more memories and calculations of what you need to do. Now, this is a really light scene. We only have one object, but if you have multiple objects and things are going kind of out of hand, it can kind of slow your computer down. Now, let's say you have this object the way you want it to look. You know, you modify it and you're saying, I like the way this teapot look. I just want it to look just like this, and get rid of all the modifiers that are taking up calculations. To do that, you're just going to right mouse click in your stack and click on collapse all. Now it's going to give you a warning sign, which is, hey, this is going to remove all your modifiers and you're probably not going to be able to get them back. So it's going to ask us if we want to continue. We're going to say yes because we know what we want it to do. And it's going to convert it down to an editable mesh. Now, you can notice here that we don't have our teapot parameters, our bend parameters anymore. We have all these new parameters of the edit mesh modifier, which we're going to go into on a different lesson. But you can notice here that you can't edit them anymore, but we can add new ones. So let's just add a bend modifier again, down to the B's. Where am I going? B. And this time it's going to bend based on whatever geometry is left over. Alright, so let's Control Z that to get back to here. And not always, but sometimes you can Control Z to get your modifiers back. This doesn't always work, but it probably will work for this instance. So let's Control Z one more time. Oops. I just put in expert mode. If you ever click Control X on accident, here's a random fact. You're going to go into expert mode, and to get out of that, you're just going to cancel expert mode. So that's a good tip. If you ever Control X and all your things go away, it's just basically you're in expert mode. Click to cancel down there at the bottom right. And okay, so back on track here. So we Control Z'd, and it did give us our modifiers back, and we can go and edit based on the state it was on before. Alright, so let's delete this object. Go back to our Create panel, which is right up here to the left of the Modify panel. You know, let's zoom our grid out here. Let's create a box. Alright, so let's go to our Modify panel here. And let's add a Turbosmooth. And now, if let's say you want to quickly get to the T's, if you're in this drop-down menu, just hit T, and it'll bring you down to the T area. So Turbosmooth, whoa, what did it do? This is what the Turbosmooth modifier does. It takes the edges and tries to make it smoother. So we can see that we can turn a box into some sort of flattened sphere towards the end of it. Alright, so now let's add another modifier. Let's add the bend modifier. Let's add the bend modifier again. That's a nice, fun one to work with. Let's bend it a little bit. And then let's add another modifier. Which one should we add? Let's add a taper modifier. Let's see what a taper modifier does. Okay, so taper modifier is basically gonna kind of flatten it out in this, you know, weird way, and you know, just experiment with some of these modifiers and what they do. Now let's say we want to bend the this object forward this way. Well, you maybe think, let's just go back to our bend modifier and bend it, but then you're gonna get these really wonky results. Why is it doing that? Let's turn the taper off with the light bulb, and you're gonna notice it's bending this geometry. It's not bending the new geometry that we made right here in the taper. And that's a very important fact you have to take note of, that it starts at the top and it works its way down. And so if we hit the bend, it's only going to be calculating information below it. It's not even looking at the taper. It doesn't know the taper exists as a modifier. So if we want to bend it this way without those wonky results we were getting, we need to add another bend modifier. And this bend modifier, as you can see with this box, is looking at the new geometry we created with the taper modifier. Now, I know this is really confusing at first, but you will get used to how the program thinks, trust me. It's a lot of trial and error and repetition. So let's go ahead and bend this. And then we notice we get much more predictable results. That's because it's bending the taper geometry. Now let's go back to taper and see what it does. It's not following the box like you'd expect it to. And again, that's because it's only looking at the geometry below it. Let's turn the top bend off. It's looking at this geometry. So in order to taper this, we need to add another taper modifier. You know, hit T in the drop-down menu. It's going to bring it a taper. And that's going to taper your box right there in the way you'd expect it to. Alright, so that's basics of how the modify panel works. Now let's delete this and let's do one more experiment on the modify panel. Let's create a cylinder for this one. Drop it smack dab right in the middle of the grid. Go to our modify panel. And for this one, we're going to look for a twist modifier. And we're going to go ahead and twist this, and we're going to notice it kind of jaggeds the edge. Doesn't really work for a cylinder. So what can we do to, you know, modify this cylinder so it'll look more cool or whatever when you bend it? So let's add a bend modifier and then bend it. And then now let's say we twist it, it's going to look better, but no, it's just twisting the original geometry. Now let's say you want to add the twist above the bend and see what it does. To do that, all you do is grab the twist, and then, you know, you're going to notice it has these little blue lines, and you're just going to drag it right above the bend modifier, you know, hold it down. That's how you move modifiers in the stack. And then now when we twist it, it's going to twist based on the new geometry. And so you can switch back and forth and notice what it does for different things. And so this is all just to drive the point home that it starts at the top, works its way to the bottom. And that's a very important thing to remember when you start modifying your objects with the modify panel. Alright, so just repetition, let's do it one more time with another different example. Let's drop a teapot right in the middle. And then I'm going to introduce you to the edit poly modifier. Just real quick, we're not going to do anything fancy, but go down to the ease. We're going to go to the edit poly modifier. Now this is where we can start running into trouble with the stack. I'll show you how. So we're going to go into this in depth later, but for now I just want you to hit one of the polygon button, which is right here. It's this flat red square. And you notice you can actually start selecting the polygons on the object. So select any polygon anywhere. Hit the W to bring up your move gizmo. Now we're moving just that polygon. And so move it out there, you know, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And then let's say, oh wait, I kind of want to make the entire teapot a little bit bigger. Let's go back to the teapot and edit the radius. We're going to get a warning message. It's going to say, hey, this modifier exists that depends on topology, so it's, you know, you moved it in such a way to where it's like, hey, it might give you the wrong results if you go try to edit the radius. Now, this will work sometimes it won't work. This is just a warning. We're just going to hit yes. And then we notice that it works for this case. However, you can kind of see that you get those undesired results it was talking about. That it kind of scales and rotates as, you know, it gets big and it's fine, and it just doesn't work out the way you'd want it to. So not all modifiers, you can't go back down all the time, which is a shame, but it's just the nature of the beast. Different modifiers don't work with other modifiers. Some you can go right back and forth and it works great. Now, you tackle those on an as-need basis. There's too many modifiers to go and list all of them that you need to watch out for. But yeah, that is the basics of the modify panel.